Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hello, look at
How are
our
you?
team here. How fun.
Big
So
group of presenters
welcome.
today.
Yeah, I know everyone looks great. I love it. And it's really early here, so props to all of us. Welcome everyone to our Getting Started with Data Integration FME Desktop webinar. This webinar is catered towards people who are just getting started with FME. So if you're new to FME, you are definitely in the right place, and we're so excited to have you. We're going to have a lot of opportunities for Q&A throughout the webinar. We're actually pausing after each section to have some Q&A. So please use that chat panel you should have like a GoToWebinar control panel, and there's a little box you can type in, and that's where you can send all our questions. We're going to be answering them on the air, behind the scenes, and then at the end, you even get an opportunity to come on with us live if you want to. So please keep us busy with the questions.
It'll be good. I'll help to shape the webinar, so give us whatever you've got.
Exactly. But and then if you need any help with GoToWebinar, I'll be behind the scenes, kind of helping keep things running smoothly. So that's where you can find me. But I think with that, I'm going to go away.
Alrighty.
And you guys can kick it off.
Sounds good. All right, so yeah, we'll just start off with some brief introductions of who's going to be presenting today. And we'll go in order of who's on the left side and we'll work to the right. So starting off with myself, my name's Chris. I've been with SAFE for the last 3 years as an FME technology expert, and I'll pass it off to Dara.
Hi everyone, my name's Dara. I've been at SAFE for just under a year. So I was in your position this time last year.
Hi, I'm Javita. I'm a desktop expert as well. I'll pass it on to Kaylin.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. I'm also a desktop expert and I'm the newest member to the team.
All right, and we also have obviously Steph working behind the scenes for anything webinar related. And for the Q&A, we have Nampreet working behind the scenes to answer any questions that we can't address in our Q&A session. He'll be able to chat out that way. Just gonna turn the webcams off now. Alrighty. And with that, we can get going. So since this is a webinar for newer users, we figured let's start off with a little bit of an introduction of who we are here at SAFE Software. So we've been around for a little over 25 years solving data challenges. We have over 10,000 organizations that trust us worldwide. And this is really apparent if you've been on our FME community because people are speaking in all different languages. They're coming from all different areas around the world and all different industries as well. Our mission here at SAFE is to help organizations like yours maximize the value of your data, no matter where it's stored or what application you use. And we enable organizations to do so using the FME integration platform. So here you see the 3 products we produce: FME Desktop, FME Server in the middle, and FME Cloud on the right. But today we're going to be focusing mainly on that left side, just in FME Desktop. That's the environment where you're going to build and run your data workflows. We won't really be touching on FME Server or FME Cloud, but for those of you who are interested, this is where all the automation pieces come in. So this is the part of the platform that will enable you to automate the workflows that you've built in FME Desktop using triggers like a schedule, a file being uploaded to an FTP site, a directory, or even an email being sent to FME Server. This is also where you're going to be able to create server workspace apps, and that's a really great way to make non-FME users have the power of an FME at their fingertips because they're very easy to create and share. So now that we're a little bit more familiar with the product line itself, we'll cover today's agenda, and we're going to start off with reading data. And this is kind of going to follow the same logical flow as you would building a workspace. So we'll start with reading data, we'll move into visualizing data, followed by manipulating and writing out the data. So it should follow the same progression as the workspaces that you would be building. But before we get started, we figured we have a poll question for you because we want to get a better idea of what area do you find the most challenging. So any of the presenters have any of their challenges that they'd like to share as we go through this?
I think it was the vocabulary for me when I first started. I'd be talking about something and I would have Natalie, who was from from the knowledge team telling me kind of feature types and feature caching, and I wasn't too sure what they were about. So we'll be talking a little bit about those, I believe, today. How about you guys?
Yeah, I think that's a good one, Joita. I think for me, it was kind of understanding the schema when I was writing out my data. That was something that was a little new to me when I was starting out with FME. I found it a little bit tricky.
All right, I'm just going to close this down and I'll share the results.
Awesome. Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I was actually speaking to my partner the other day, and she was mentioning that she uses a similar tool at work. And previous to migrating into that tool, she was living in Excel land. So everything she was doing was in Excel formulas. And so her biggest challenge was that you couldn't actually see the results right away. So with Excel, you can type in your formula, say equals cell E4 plus B6, and it'll show you the result right away. So one of her challenges was when she was building the workflows, she couldn't quite visualize that. So she was having a little bit of a tough time trying to get an idea of how it was going to work, and how to apply it to an entire data set rather than just one cell. So we'll cover some tips on how you can visualize your data as you're building your workflows throughout this. So hopefully that helps you get over that hurdle.
So
we've got manipulating data at 63% and then writing data at 32%, and kind of downwards from there, if that helps.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, so we have a lot of tips coming up for both of those areas, along with reading and writing as well. So hopefully we'll help address your questions. And if you do have any that aren't fully covered, please, again, do use that chat panel and we'll help to get those answers out to you. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Kaylin, and she'll start working out with.
So FME Desktop is where we read data, and it's also referred to as FME Workbench. So what is a reader? FME Workbench is where we author workflows or workspaces, and typically, but not always, these workflows are initiated by readers. So a reader is an FME term for an object in translation that reads a source data set. So it ultimately controls how your data is brought into FME. Each reader and writer contains distinct format parameters which can be accessed through double-clicking the element, and they're both yellow in color. So what's the difference between a data set and feature type? So what do we actually read in the FME? So readers are used to access either datasets or feature types, datasets being an organized collection of data with a common theme, and a feature type being a subset of that collection. So a dataset can have one or many feature types. Datasets can be file or folder based and stored on a file system, on the web, or within a database. The parameters I mentioned in the last slide are used to control how FME interprets your data and whether the parameters will be applied to the entire data set or just to individual feature types. So how does FME read data? So FME Workbench has a really easy to use GUI that allows you to drag and drop files onto the canvas. That's probably the easiest way to add a reader. Similarly, the GUI has an add reader button along the top ribbon, and it also has an add reader drop-down menu, which can both be used to add readers to your workspace. Data may not always be in the most traditional places, like locally on your computer. So maybe your company works with ArcGIS Online or Oracle. Well, FME can connect to these. So adding a database or web connection, this can be accessed through tools, FME options, and then web or database connections. So saving connections can allow you to reuse them in different readers, writers, and workspaces. So it's kind of efficient in that sense. If the connection parameters change, also you can always edit them in one place back under that tools FME options rather than per workspace that uses the connection. And it really just proves for an easy way to manage data sources as well. So lastly, ready, set, run your readers. FME also refers to this as feature caching. So just like a hibernating squirrel, feature caching is FME's way of simply storing data away so that it can be accessed when it's required. Except it's not fruit or nuts, it's data. So why is feature caching useful? Caches can be useful used in Visual Preview for incremental workspace inspection, so you can actually view your data as it transitions throughout your workspace. Inspecting through can be a really good way to catch and correct errors because you can kind of see how your attributes change from transformer to transformer or readers to transformer. Why do I like feature caching? I suggest people run and cache their readers just so we know initially FME is interpreting everything properly. Also, sometimes when working with data or formats that require validation, like XML, reading back in an output file can be a really good way to check the success of your validation. So now I'm gonna so now I'm just gonna show you a quick demo on how to read in data. So I just made a little data set called client detail. So I'm just gonna drag and drop it right onto the canvas, and you can see that it auto detects the format as Excel. And I'm just gonna hit OK. Okay, so this is a reader. So this is our feature type, and we're gonna read it in and cache the data. And you can see now that I can quickly just make sure everything's being brought in properly. Now, if I was working with a really big data set and still trying to do a proof of concept, maybe I didn't want to drown my performance quality in kind of thousands of records, I can always change the max features to read. So this is kind of just a cool tip if you're working with large data sets. And now you can see that we've changed the quantity being brought into FME.
Kaylin had touched upon feature caching there. We have a couple of good resources on feature caching, which might interest the folks out there. I think Steph will chat them out. One is a webinar recording that we have, as well as a really informative blog that our Mark Ireland wrote up a couple years ago. They just provide some good background and some tips on how to leverage feature caching in your workspaces.
So I'm going to be showing how to visualize your data in FME, the different means of visualizing and how different formats look in FME. Visualizing your data in your workspace is a key factor to building a successful workflow. From viewing the data as it's being read into FME to how the data is manipulated throughout the workspace, and finally to writing out to your desired format. Being able to see the data at each stage is a useful means of learning how each transformer manipulates the data, but also a great way to ensure everything is going nice and smoothly, and also to troubleshoot if there are any issues in your workspace. When I was starting out with FME, this was probably one of my favorite parts of FME, you can see how the workspace progresses from start to finish. So it's great for like visual learners. So where can we see our data in FME? So there are two main places that we will view our data as we build our workflow. The first and probably most used is built into FME and it's called the visual preview. So that's this top image here on the slide. And the second is a program that is installed alongside FME and it's called the data inspector. The data inspector acts as like a slightly expanded version of the visual preview. I particularly like to use the data inspector when it comes to comparing like larger data sets and multiple files, as they can be added and overlaid on top of one another. Other important terms to note when visualizing our data include feature caching, which Kaylin mentioned in her slides, and display control, which we will take a look at in the next slide. Okay, so you've added your data to the workspace using a reader. Now it's time to inspect that data. How can we do this? So you can choose to click the View Source Data option on the Reader feature type, as you can see I'm doing here in the video, and this will activate the Visual Preview. So I'm just going to inspect the data in the Visual Preview. You can see that I'm just going to click on some of the columns so that I can sort by ascending or descending numerical or alphabetical order. Or you can choose to activate feature caching. So here I'm just showing where to activate feature caching. It's under the Run button. And you can see I'm just going to run the workspace so I can create a cache of the features in the data set. So as Kaylin was saying, the feature caches are great for when you're developing your workspace and you don't need to reread the data again and again. So the visual preview should activate when you click on that little feature cache icon on the reader feature type. But if for ever some reason the visual preview is missing, I know I've definitely lost it before. You can see here I'm just showing where to find it. So if you click on the View tab, click the Windows drop down, and click Visual Preview. And that kind of goes for other panels that you might not see in FME as well. So like the translation log, transformer gallery, and so on. Okay, so in the last slide, we saw how FME visualizes tabular data. Now we will see how FME handles spatial data. In this example, we can see that I'm going to read in an Excel file again, but this time if I open my parameters, I can see that there are coordinates associated with each business in this file. FME can interpret these latitude and longitude coordinates and assign an X and Y value to each. I can also specify a coordinate system for my Excel file. So once I do that and I read in my file, I think I'm just going to make sure that feature caching is turned on here so I can create a cache of those features. You'll see that it looks pretty similar to the data set that we read in on the previous slide. But because there's the latitude and longitude points, FME can create points of this. So you can see here, I'm just going to scroll down to the left-hand side of my visual preview and activate the graphics view. So the graphics view then appears alongside the table. And this gives me a great understanding of where the businesses are in Vancouver. But it would also be great if I could see this in relation to where they are in real life. So you can see I'm just going to add a background map to this to the data and the graphics view. So this just gives me a better understanding of my data. Just with the graphics view, you can see I can zoom in, I can pan around, and then I can select different features in the data set. And they will be highlighted then in the table view. Likewise, in the table view, I can click on the record and then it will highlight in the graphics view. Now you can see I'm just adding another format, and this is a shapefile. Okay, so I'm just going to read in this shapefile. And you can see that shows up in our graphics view as well. But say I wanted to view both data sets together. I can do this. So you can see I activate my display control and I hold down control and click on the feature cache for the Excel file. Now I can see where the points lie in these different areas in Vancouver. It's a little bit hard to see the points at the moment, so I can actually control how the data is visualized in the visual preview by going in and clicking on these 4 boxes and changing the color of the points. Okay, so let's take a look at another format that FME can read in, which is point clouds. So again, I'm going to add the data to the canvas by just dragging and dropping, and I'm going to read the data in. The visual preview this time will automatically display the point cloud in 3D mode, as it's a 3D format. If it doesn't happen to activate the 3D mode, you can click the 3D button on the graphics view. With 3D data, I can pan, zoom, and select just like 2D data, but I can also orbit using the wheel on my mouse or the orbit option. FME reads the entire point cloud as one feature, but individual points can be queried. So I can select a point, but there's only one feature in our table view. So this is a great time to activate the feature information. Feature information is a great tool for gaining a better understanding of your data. As you can see in this case, I can look at each individual point and see the attributes associated with that point. Back to the visual preview, I can only zoom in so far and the window isn't too big. So this will be a great time to use the data inspector. I can activate the data inspector by clicking the last button on the left-hand side of the visual preview. And as I said, this will open up the program that's installed alongside FME, which you can see here. So this just really kind of gives us a more expanded view of the visual preview. It's a little easier when working with larger data sets, I find. I particularly like it when I'm trying to compare data sets as well. So you can open like multiple views and compare the data throughout. And yeah, that is everything I have to say about visualizing your data, or everything I can think of anyway right now. So if anyone has any questions.
Oh, great, Dara. There is a question here about feature caching. They're asking, does feature caching affect whether or not features are counted immediately as transformers are added and the workspace is developed? For example, each of the datasets just added has counts beside them, say 171 versus 20. Is this always available, or is it a setting?
So is the, if I'm understanding the question correctly, are the feature counts always available? Is that the question?
I think that's the way I'm understanding it. So I don't know if anybody has any other takes there, but.
So the feature counts will be there as long as feature caching is turned on. And like I said, it's better to have the feature caching turned on when you're developing the workspace, as it's it can kind of slow down the workspace, but as you're developing it, it's a great tool to understand how the data is being read in and manipulated. So if you turn it off, the feature counts won't be there.
Another tip there is, yeah, like you were alluding to, when you're going to production, we often recommend turning off feature caching once you've published your workspace or are running your workspace in production. I just wanted to also share out a related article to this. It's part of our Getting Started with FME tutorial series on the knowledge base. I think Steph will chat that out. It's a great overview on what Dara just covered and some other tips on how to best visualize or view your data using FME.
Right on. Yeah, so let's get started with manipulating data, and this is going to be done using transformers. So just a little bit of a quick overview of what we're going to cover in this section. We're going to talk all about just transformers at a very high level. We'll talk about how to add them and edit their parameters, and then we'll get a better understanding of ports and how attributes are handled using transformers as well. So just in that screenshot on the left-hand side there, we've already seen that the readers on the left-hand side are those yellow objects. We also have writers on the far right-hand side, which are also yellow. Jovita is going to talk about those in the next section. But in the middle, we have those blue objects and one green one in this case as well. Those are all the transformers. Those are the tools that are going to be doing all the work. This will be manipulating the data, changing the geometry, adding an attribute name, or renaming things. So there's a lot of things that transformers can do. So at a very high level, what we have is we have a transformer gallery of like 556 different transformers. So if you need to manipulate your data in any way, there's a good chance that one of the transformers already does that for you. Now, we do realize that they can be very intimidating to figure out what they do. So that's why we've tried to simplify things by naming them pretty logically. So if you need to buffer a point, we have the buffer tool. If you want to add a date timestamp, you have a date timestamper. So typically, if you have a task that you're trying to do, add ER to that, and you'll have the transformer for it. So transformers can be added to the canvas using a couple of different ways. You can do this by adding transformers to the canvas simply by typing on the canvas. So if I wanted to create points, I will type down vertex creator, and it'll put down the transformer. The next thing I'll have to do is connect that to the reader or the previous transformer. But if I wanted to do that a little bit more efficiently, I could actually select that first reader or the previous transformer, and then simply type the transformer name and hit enter. That'll pre-connect it for me. So transformers always have to be connected to the readers in order for the data to actually flow. Once it is connected, then you can open up the parameters by double-clicking on the transformer or clicking on that red setting icon. And that's where you can start to set the values of your parameters. So this could be a hard-coded value like 100 that was just shown, or it could be more of a dynamic thing, such as an attribute value from that feature, such as the longitude and latitude in this case. So this is going to be handled on a per feature basis. So this would be very similar to that Excel example where if you're doing equals A, it's like cell A1 plus cell C1, and that would be your formula. In this case, it would be done just using those attribute values for that attribute. or for that feature, sorry. When it comes to using transformers, you also have the option to create formulas in an arithmetic editor. So if you wanted to do something that was more like a calculator, this can be done just in that second drop down there. You see there's open arithmetic editor, and this will handle it very similar to a regular calculator. So you can click on a numeric attribute, do a minus, and then another attribute, and it'll show that you have kind of those plus, minus, divide, and multiply symbols. And that's your indicator that that's using the arithmetic editor. So that's going to perform the math functions right out of the gate. The next option is using the text editor. And this, just as I'm showing here on the screen, you have all these FME functions. And here you have the option to do some math. So if you wanted to subtract, this can use a subtract function. So it kind of adds a little bit of complexity. And you can still do the same thing by selecting two numeric attributes or typing in the values that you want to perform some math on. The last option is if you're just doing the text editor as well, you can concatenate values. So if you're not using any FME functions or the arithmetic editor, this is just going to combine those attributes into a single string attribute, and we'll see that here. So I've just hit the partial run button, so we're going to run up to the attribute manager, and we can see in that first column of population increase, we have, and population increase on the second one as well, sorry, we have the same values. The first was using the arithmetic editor, and the second was using the FME function subtract. And the last little bit, actually just pause that at the end there, sorry about that. We also have the population range. So that would be just using that text editor. This is just to show that the strings will be concatenated together if you're not using the arithmetic editor or if you're not using the FME subtract function.
I just wanted to add that all of this is being done in the attribute manager, which is a really powerful transformer that, as you can see, lets you do a lot of different things like arithmetic formulas and such. But there's also multiple ways to do things in FME. So if you decided that you wanted to do a concatenation kind of process, you can just start typing that in, and FME will find you the closest thing using alias names. So there are multiple ways to do things in FME.
Definitely, yeah. There's, as we did mention, there's in this case it's 548, so that's using a previous version of FME. But there are both FME functions and transformers to do that. So that's a really good point. As Jovita mentioned, the attribute manager is kind of like the Swiss Army knife, and it's actually one of my personal favorites because it does so many different things. But if you do prefer to have things on the canvas more, then yeah, we do have transformers that can do all the same things. So whatever your preference is, you can kind of choose that way. So now we can look at understanding ports and attributes a little bit more. So all transformers are going to have input ports, and in most cases, they're going to have an output port as well. In the case of the attribute manager, we just have a single input and one output. And in the case of the feature joiner, we actually have two inputs, a left and a right, and that's going to join our data. And we also have multiple outputs, including a joined, unjoined left, unjoined right, and a rejected port as well. So the nice thing about the rejected port is, for whatever reason, if something goes wrong in that transformer, if the feature doesn't quite match up right, or if it doesn't really pass through it, you're going to find out right away. So by default in FME, if a transformer rejects anything, it's going to stop the translation. You're going to see this translation log pop up. There's going to be some red text and say, here's a rejection message. Something didn't quite work here, so you might want to look into it. And this is where feature caching really comes in handy, because you can click on that feature cache on the rejected port where you see that red one. That means the first feature we brought in has failed, that transformer, sorry. So we can click on that feature cache and we can see that a new attribute called FME rejection code right there, that has been appended to our data set just to tell us something isn't quite right with this, and this is what the transformer detected. So the feature joiner, sorry, has detected that we're missing a right key. I've rigged this so it happened intentionally. The bottom data set didn't have a key, so it wouldn't join with the left. So that's how we can see that the feature has been rejected by this feature joiner. But what if you wanted your transformer or translation to continue regardless if any features failed the transformers? You do still have that option, and there's a couple of ways you can do that. The first one would be just add another transformer to that rejected port. That's going to indicate that, yeah, I'm well aware that some features may be rejected, and this is what I want to do with them. So in this case, I'm just going to log them using a logger transformer, and that's just going to print it to the translation log. The other option is to change the default rejected feature handling in the navigator window, just on that left-hand side. So by default, we have it set to terminate translation, but if you did want this to change, you can, if you're doing something like a lot of HTTP calls, then you can change this to continue translation, and the workspace will keep running regardless if features go out of that rejected port. Now we'll move into different types of attributes. So we have two main types of attributes. There's user attributes and format attributes. We're going to start by focusing on the user attributes. So you'll probably see that if I just bring my cursor there and I'll highlight it right here, hopefully the circle is following. There's a little triangle on that reader, and there's also a little triangle on the transformer as well on that output port. So those are little drop downs to show you what attributes you have available to you at that given point in the translation. So in this case, we have label, level, and FME feature type, and those are exposed. Those are available in our visual preview. What we don't see are the feature information. So this is a CAD file that is rich with other information. So we have things like color, the entity handle number, the IDs for certain features. All of this is available in the feature information, and these are not exposed by default. So let's take a look at how to expose these. You can do this in the reader if you switch over to the Format Attributes tab, but you can also use an attribute exposer as well, and that's my preferred way of doing it. So in the attribute exposer, if you open up the parameters for that, you'll see a dropdown of all the different types of format attributes for that data set that's connected to it. So if I wanted to expose the AutoCAD color and the AutoCAD entity into my feature table and use those in my translation, I can then do that. So I just drop those down, and you'll see that in the bottom now they're in my table. So those have gone from my feature information just into those format attributes into the table, so I can actually use these in the workspace now. So if I wanted to do some logic on the AutoCAD color, I can do that. You can also expose attributes from feature caches or even from entirely different data sets. So if you're trying to match up to a different schema, or if you're wanting to pull in values from, say, an XML file, this is a great way to do that. And that wraps up this section. Are there any questions that have come in, Ampreet?
I have a question for you. Sometimes we see transformers appearing in a blue color, sometimes a green or teal color. Can you tell the users what the difference between the colors of the transformers they might see in the canvas are?
That's a great question. Yeah. So the blue transformers that you see when you're adding them to the canvas, those are all the transformers that come shipped natively with FME. So this would be things like the attribute manager, the tester, the logger, for example. Anything that's green, that would be, or teal, those would be custom transformers or transformers that you've downloaded from the FME hub. So the green ones are embedded. Those ones are single instances. The teal ones are linked. So those are linked to a source, and that would be an FMX file. That's just the custom transformer format. And if anyone changes that FMX file, it's going to be updated into that workspace. The embedded one won't be updated unless the user manually installs the update.
Great.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good segue for the FME Hub as well. If you aren't aware of the FME Hub, that's a great place to see kind of additional transformers that our users have uploaded to the greater community as well. So this is where you can download more custom transformers or custom formats. So it goes beyond our 500 and I think it was 556 transformers and really extends that to greater levels.
So in this section, we're going to talk about writing data, which I personally think is the coolest part. I mean, presumably you've done all this work of reading your data in, visualizing it, manipulating the data just so you can write out your output to where it needs to go, be that a file, a directory, a web service, or a database. So both spatial and non-spatial. So here we're going to talk about the writer format. How well do you know it? How to judge success. Was my translation successful? Inspecting the output data. And then there is one thing that we see new users really interested in doing all the time, but we don't really know what it's called. So we're going to talk about that as well, and then some tips for troubleshooting. So first, writing data. When you're writing your data, you want to know what format you're writing to. You want to have sort of a picture of what your output looks like. And why is this important? Well, some formats, such as the shapefile, have certain requirements. For example, the format limitation has 10-character maximum limit for their field attributes. So when you write that out and you see that your attribute names or field names have been truncated or shortened, that's because of the format itself. So it's a good idea just to know sort of what to expect. Or if there are any dependencies, such as if you're writing to Oracle, do you have the Oracle client? And does the bit version match your FME bit version? So this is important to know when you're writing your data. But it's not something you have to worry too much about. You can write to it and then find out afterwards, let's say if you don't know the format very well. Wanted to mention that with 400 plus formats, there's a lot, I know. And we don't know all of them ourselves either. So something really useful to use is to use the help documentation, and you can access that by hitting that writer feature type. So those are the tan or yellow objects there. And you can right click and hit help, and that will give you documentation that includes kind of common cases of how it's used, how to fill in the parameters, examples, and just it's really helpful to be able to fill in your writer that way. So I'm going to hit next here, and it's going to run this GIF. There it is. And this is running the translation. So I'm just hitting run on my feature type. And as you can see, that blue, it says feature caching is on. My translation is successful. And those blue warnings are just to tell me that feature caching is enabled. And so if you're running a really large workspace in production, it might slow down your workspace a little bit. So let's take a closer look at that translation log, which is what we were looking at, kind of zooming by as we hit run. So kind of in the theme of colors, red text is really important. Those are generally errors. If you see red cogs or red ports on your transformer, it means something hasn't been filled out that needs to be filled. And so red text in the translation log means it's an error. It's important to take a look at and see what went wrong and if there are any suggestions there. Blue text, like that feature caching warning, is a warning. You can take a look at it and see if it sounds acceptable to you. So in my case, feature caching is enabled and I know about it, so I can ignore it. I'm going to skip over to text wrap here. I just wanted to highlight two more things in this bar, and that's the text wrap, just to make it easier to read through your translation log instead of scrolling from left all the way to right. And then the ability to search the translation log. Let's say I know there's an issue with a particular transformer because my feature counts have stopped at a certain part in the translation on a particular transformer. I can search that in the log for more information. Inspecting the output. So this is similar to what Dara talked about already, and I just wanted to highlight the different ways that you can do that for transformers as well. So you can either select that green icon for inspection, or you can click and drag across a couple of them and get a view of all of those. That's helpful for something like a CAD transformation, when you've got text and you've got geometry, and you want to view them both at once. Or you can hit Control, or if you're on a Mac like I am, you can hit Command and select. And I've got on the left there that you can also open the output in the native program to view the output. And this might be helpful for like a CAD example. If you're writing line styles or if you're writing blocks, those reference block libraries in AutoCAD, so you might not be able to view them in the inspector. So it's a good idea to check in a native program as well. Okay, this is the fun part. So fanouts are most likely what most people are looking for. And that's the case when you've got inputs and you want to write multiple outputs. So in this example here, we've got feature type fanouts and data set fanouts. More often, we see people using the feature type fanout. And what that does is if I had a file and I had elevation information, for this example, it's CAD, but you can imagine this with Excel as well. And using a feature type fanout for an Excel file, that would mean that each elevation is written out to a new sheet. So each range is a new sheet of the same Excel file. Similarly for CAD or AutoCAD, each elevation is a different layer in the same .dwg file. For a dataset fanout, that would mean a whole new data set. So each elevation is its own DWG file or its own Excel file. So this is an example of writing from Google KML to a shapefile writer, Reminder that those yellow ones are feature types and the blue is a transformer. So how we set up a feature type fanout is by double-clicking on that shapefile writer and giving the shapefile name a attribute. So for me, this is name of neighborhoods, and in the bottom there, this is just the city of Vancouver. And what's highlighted there, I want to say it's Fairview, but I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. Somebody correct me if you guys know. But we'll be fanning out based on those different zones, and we should expect to get different shapefiles. So feature type means kind of different things for different formats, and it can be kind of confusing at first until you start to play around with it and kind of get an idea of what to expect. So for a shapefile, this would create different shapefiles in the same folder based on the different zones. So I've got downtown, Fairview, Kitsilano, and a few more. In a geodatabase, this would create different feature classes in the same geodatabase. So it's kind of fun to play around with, and it's pretty easy to do. So when you guys get a chance to play with FME, definitely recommend trying it out. It's very powerful. And then finally, I've got a bit of a troubleshooting checklist. This is stuff that we do on our own as well when we come across a problem. Our first questions to ask are, if I have any errors in the translation log, are there kind of any suggestions in there already in the translation log? And if there's any kind of code or keywords, we can search for that in the community to see what's written about it already, either in articles, discussion questions on the forums, or any kind of announcements. Did I get an output and does it make sense? So that comes back to inspecting your output to see whether it came out correctly. Are these warnings or errors documented in the community? Yeah. So that was going back to our resources and taking a look at what's there. And then checking your parameters. And if all else fails, try writing a smaller sample. Let's say I'm running thousands of records and I keep hitting the same error. Try a subset using something like a sampler, which is a transformer to sample out a small subset, or as Kaylin had mentioned, limiting how many features you're reading in. So that's all on the writing side. I have this tips and tricks slide that I wanted to share, and I'm going to put the others a little bit on the spot. But firstly, I've got rerunning the entire workspace. When you've got feature caching on, occasionally your caches can go stale. What that means is you might see a yellow icon or something's changed upstream, and you just want to hit run, rerun entire workspace, just to give that a fresh run. And then secondly, absolutely use the feature information window in the visual preview or the data inspector, as that gives you kind of more clues of what's inside your data set and just to be able to see kind of more clearly what's there. How about you guys? Any good tips and tricks?
Definitely going to reiterate that rerun the entire workspace as well. If you make a change to your source data set, if that's an Excel file, a database file, you added new features, you will need to rerun the entire workspace because the cache will be using what's cached unless you rerun the entire thing. So that is a very important tip. I would say one of my tips and tricks for if you're getting any errors when you're writing, it is pretty helpful to just quickly scroll through that translation log. There's a good chance that the error message is going to tell you exactly what's wrong. So in the case of a database table or an Excel file, if you have that open, it might be causing it to fail the writer. So you'll likely need to close the Excel file, for example. And the warning message will tell you that. So it is worth taking that 5 seconds instead of panicking, just calm down, read that log just a little bit, and it might tell you exactly what's going wrong.
I would just go back to what I was saying in my section about finding the different panels. So sometimes when you look at a tutorial online, FME might look a little different to the way it's appearing on your screen. And that's just how the user has their windows set up. So just by going to that view tab, you can activate all the windows that you would like the feature information and the visual preview and translation log.
To use bookmarks and annotations so you can remember what you're doing throughout your workspace. So if you leave it for a bit and come back to it, you still kind of know where you left off.
I like that one. Annotations is a really great one, I think, as well. It kind of separates FME out from just coding, because somebody else coming to this workspace can take a look through it and logically follow that progression and look at those annotations and kind of logical bookmarks to figure out what's going on and be able to make edits or changes on their own. I like that. So I wanted to quickly chat out about our free resources. We've talked about the hub a little bit, which is the FME hub, which has more transformers, templates, and connectors, and that kind of allows for connecting to even more formats than we had mentioned before by connecting to APIs for some of them. The community is a place where you can ask your how-to questions and get helpful answers from either experts or partners or even other users themselves, and it's just a really great way to engage the community. You can also make suggestions for ideas of what you'd like to see added to FME, and our product team does take a look at those, and it's very helpful for us to know. We've got articles and tutorials on the Knowledge Center, as well as live online training and videos of that same training. I know Dara's really involved in some of that training as well, so maybe you'll see him if you decide to take that on. And then you can also work through it on your own pace as well. And then lastly, technical support. You can contact us on the forums, in live chat, and through support cases if you think you found a bug or that there's an issue that you can't quite solve. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thank you. We will be here if you guys have any more questions, if you want to kind of come on and join us. I'm going to put my camera back on as well here.
We have some really good questions that have come in the last little while, and hopefully we can cover some of them here. One was asking, I think, are we able to update data on ArcGIS Online? How would you do that? So that's like a web platform.
Yes, so we can read and write to ArcGIS Online. And I believe we even have an article that explains change detection with ArcGIS Online. If there isn't one specifically for that, we can definitely share out the article to the change detection article. And that will apply, the same logic will apply, so you can read in your features from ArcGIS Online and the data set that you want to compare it against, and then write the outputs up to ArcGIS Online.
Awesome. And just for the users out there, you'd connect to ArcGIS Online using our web connection. So you create a web connection in FME to ArcGIS Online and basically use that web connection to connect to your data sets up there. Another good question about the difference between, or our recommendations between using the visual preview that's embedded within Workbench versus the standalone data inspector application. Any preferences or recommendations from you guys for the users out there?
I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say for larger data sets, I prefer the bigger screen. So that's when I would use or jump over to the data inspector. But typically, I would mainly just use the visual preview.
I think it's largely up to preference as well. Some people on our team are just diehard data inspector fans. And if you're using 3D data, for example, you definitely want to maximize that kind of screen value. And it's just easier to be able to check the feature information, the table. And if your tables are huge, it's just a little bit nicer. But it's definitely the same thing. The data inspector is embedded as the visual preview. So it's whatever you prefer, and you're not locked into either. If you're in visual preview, you can open up the data inspector with the data that you want to view selected.
And with FME, like I always say, we always try to give multiple ways of doing the same thing. So oftentimes, you'll sometimes use the visual preview during your workspace authoring, but if you want to just quickly preview something, you can definitely open up the data inspector to do that. Just to view your data. Thanks for that.
Sorry, if you do prefer data inspector over visual preview, there is a way to redirect your output so that it automatically opens in data inspector as well.
Yeah, great point there. Yeah, there's that little button in the visual preview to as well, where you can also launch Data Inspector. Another question here, it came a little earlier on. It's about can FME read two different data sets using two different readers? So that's a common question we get from a lot of new users out there.
Yeah, not sure who wants to tackle that one, but the answer is yes. You can read from multiple data sets. That could be file-based, databases, web-based. You can add as many readers to the canvas as you'd like. And you can kind of string them all together using feature joiners, feature mergers, and any other joining transformers. They could be spatially based as well. So you have lots of options there.
And the segue into the next question, if you're working with two different spatial data sets and they're in different coordinate systems or EPSGs or what have you, how would you work with two data sets or perform transformations on two data sets that have different coordinate systems?
Yeah, so you'd have the same option as really any other GIS. You'd first have to reproject the data. So you have the option to bring both readers in. So they can be different coordinate systems at that point. And then your first step would be to reproject to a common coordinate system. So say we live in UTM 83-10. If one of ours is in UTM 83-10, the other one is in lat long, and we want them both to be in UTM zone, then we just reproject the one lat long data set to UTM 83. And then we can continue on with our processing from there. And that's also really important if you're doing any type of spatial joins as well. They do need to be in common coordinate systems, otherwise the features won't quite line up.
A good clue there is to use the Data Inspector or Visual Preview. And if you turn on the background map, you can go to Zoom Extents and you can see whether they overlay or if they're in like completely different parts of the world. And that's when you have a hint there that you need to have a coordinate system and reproject it so they're the same.
Thanks for that, guys. I have a question here. Any tips on how to do some 3D to 2D transformations for users? Or things to keep in mind just to get them started?
Things to keep in mind. I think it kind of depends on what you're trying to do with that. It's a bit of a demon, but we do have a 2D forcer, so that could take most of the work out of it for you if you're working with 3D polygons. That'll just force your features into 2D. So that's one option. Any others come to mind?
There is also a 2D footprint replacer, I believe, which if you're working with buildings, perhaps you want to get the footprint of the building. It kind of depends what you're reading. Like if you're working with Revit, for example, there is an option to be able to automatically read floor plans. So that already brings that into 2D for you. So it really depends kind of what the format you're starting with and where you want to go.
Yeah. And these are like oftentimes when you're tackling these, the FME community forums, like what was mentioned earlier, is a great resource to sort of ask where you're getting stuck on and ask for some tips from users out there as well, especially for more of the lesser known transformations as well. Another hard one, I promise this might be the last hard one that we got. If somebody's trying to bring in 3 raster data sets, so like an ortho, the DSM, and how can you, I guess, merge or fuse them together to extract one building footprint as a vector data set? So maybe output it as a shape file. Any tips there?
That's a good one.
It is yeah.
That's a big one.
It is a big one.
Could you repeat what the source files were again?
So ortho, DEM, and DSM, and going to a shape file of building footprints. And that would be a vector output. There are, I know, a couple articles on the forums, if I have a chance to check that out a little later, on strategies to go from vector to sorry, from raster to vector. But I think it really depends on your data set as well there as well. See here. We had a couple of folks interested in Excel and how to sort of work better in Excel, and just sort of a plug for our webinar coming up on February 3rd. There's an Ask Me Anything on Excel. So we have a lot of Excel, I think, is one of our top formats, if not the top format. So it's a popular one. So definitely check that out. And I think Steph has chatted out the link for that as well. Got a few new questions here. Are there any transformers for, say, Esri tools like clip, erase, select by location in FME?
Yeah, so they would just be called different things. So we have a clipper transformer. It doesn't have to be Esri specific. It kind of applies to all data sets. Select by location. What would the closest thing to that be? What do you think, Sarita?
Tester.
Tester? There you go.
Tester. It's a little bit a different way of thinking and shifting the words. If you type those into the canvas, it might give you some good suggestions. But I think the tester, if you have a particular location in mind or like an area, you can do an overlaying kind of process to find either points on areas, area on area, lines on area, things like that. So an overlay or a tester for a specific location.
The other option you have there, I'm not sure if this will be the similar tool that I'm thinking of, but select by location, if I recall from my ArcGIS desktop days, was a tool where you actually click on the feature on the map and then it selects it to bring up the information as well. So I think there's another option there. You can do that in the data inspector, not in visual preview. There's a tool to do select multiple and then actually export them as a different file. So you can do it that way as well. It's a little bit more manual legwork, but you can do it that way as well.
Sorry, I'm just going to say, it looks like Wesley has his hand raised. So I am going to try and bring him on the air. Oh, no, wait, it's been lowered. Never mind, you go ahead.
Him with on air.
No worries there. Just going on that spatial theme, we had somebody ask a little earlier about how to detect or how to do overlay, say, if you want to find points within polygons. How would you do that in FME?
Yeah, again, so that would come to a transformer. So we have a point on area overlayer. Again, this would kind of fall in that same category of your data sets need to be in the same coordinate system. So you may need to consider reprojecting the data first before passing the data into the point on area overlayer. And you can do this for lines as well. So it could be a line on area overlayer, an area on the area overlayer. Of course, we picked ones with the longest names, but hey, they all do different things. There's also a spatial filter, yeah. So it's kind of more of a one-stop shop.
I was also going to say the clipper, because you've got those inside and outside ports coming out, so it's very clear kind of what's where. With the like something on area or something on something overlayer, what to look for is this overlapped attribute, whether it says one or how many overlaps there are. So you're going to use a tester afterwards.
Great, thanks for that. A common question from, I guess, beginning to intermediate users once they've come across the feature reader, what's the difference between using a reader versus the transformer that we have called a feature reader?
Good question again. Yeah, so there is a difference there with the feature reader and feature writer. The difference there is that when they're in the transformer form, so as a feature reader or feature writer, you can embed them within the transformer or within the workspace, sorry. So instead of starting the workspace off with a reader, you could actually start it with, say, a creator transformer and then do some pre-processing, say build a search envelope, something like that. And then using that information, you can feed it into the feature reader and only read in information that way. So, or only read in that subset of data. So it's a great way if you want to read in data through, or like as the translation is going on, rather than at the very start. So you have lots of options with that. You could do things like, things I've done in the past would be to write out a data set using a feature writer. And then the next transformer would be a feature reader to bring it in and then process it in a different way.
Awesome.
I saw a question that was asking, or I'm paraphrasing a little, but is there a dictionary for transformers?
Yeah, so that would definitely point to the FME documentation. So any of the transformers or readers and writers have a help button in the bottom left if you open up their parameters dialog. But you're looking for more of a dictionary, so we do have a FME terminology page, and that kind of gives a little bit of a, like what we call it, and the synonym or GUI location as well. So that kind of helps to break down the barrier.
I was also thinking, you guys are fancy with your documentation, but we have the transformer gallery as well at safe.com/transformers. So that could be a basic point too.
Yeah, that's a great spot.
The link out there to the folks, to the transformer gallery.
Thank you.
There's a version online which is linked to here, and there's also a transformer gallery panel within FME Workbench which categorizes some of our transformers by format or transformation type, I guess.
Awesome. I do see, I know we are over time here a little bit, but I do see Mark's hand is raised. Let's try and bring Mark on quickly to ask a question and see if it works. So Mark, I'm going to go ahead and make you a panelist, and you should get a prompt to share your microphone and your camera in 1 second.
Yeah, so I think I'm, yeah, sure.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to get at here is, so is there a one-to-one like dictionary for ISRI tools versus, because I'm very familiar with ISRI tools. So like, is there a one-to-one dictionary for that compared to like the FME tools? Because if there was something like that, I would probably use FME a lot more.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's an exact one-to-one. Are you familiar with the data interop extension in, like, is that what you're using in Esri, or are you using mainly the other tools?
Well, I use, you know, like ArcGIS Pro tools or ArcGIS desktop tools. I use the model builder a lot. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Nothing really comes to mind for an exact like apples to apple comparison. Yeah, because nothing really comes to mind with that. I think a lot of the tools are pretty similar. We are partners with Esri, so we actually do build the data interoperability extension. So if you have used that before, those are basically just our tools. But yeah, a lot of the functionality is similar, just uses different tool names. I think you could ask on the community if you have any particular ones that you're curious about, and then we could definitely get some answers there for you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We also,
the transformer gallery link that I chatted out, it's also searchable. It's not an exact, obviously, match. You can't search for the Esri tool name or anything there, but you can maybe try searching the key terms in that functionality that that tool is doing, and hopefully the transformer gallery will give you some options there.
You hit tab as well while you're searching for transformers. It'll search by keywords that are mentioned in the documentation and the help for the transformers. So it's just a handy tip.
Yeah, I've tried searching for transformers and they're just not named the same most of the time. I know when I did select by location, it found tester, but it didn't find anything for clip, and it didn't find anything for erase or anything like that. So
definitely, I was going to say too, we've done or get a lot of questions from ArcGIS users as well, because we do have the data interoperability extension. We did a webinar recently specifically on that with our server team. So I will chat out the link to that as well. It was one of our most popular webinars this year that I think people got a lot of really good, helpful tips and tricks from. So I'll make sure to chat that out.
okay.
But thank you, Mark. Did you have any other questions?
No, ma'am. That's it.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming on the air with us. That was fun. I'll go ahead and stop your webcam there. And I think with that, Nampreet, was there any kind of last question and maybe one more minute here, or?
I think there are a couple that might be sort of really specific and detailed, and we'll definitely get back to some of those questions which are going a little more into the advanced topics and may not be applicable to a lot of our users here, as well as some of them may require some follow-up and research on our end as well. So we'll definitely reach out to those who haven't gotten answers to their questions as well. I don't know if anybody else sees questions here that you guys want to cover.
I saw one asking, are all our webinars available online somewhere? Yes, they are. Including this one, will end up going to safe.com/webinars. You can find the whole library of them there, and you can search by keywords or names, so that's a helpful resource as well. Though everyone will be emailed this recording too, and it'll kind of take you to that page. Cool. Well, Kaylin and Dara, I think this was your first time presenting on a webinar with us, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well done.
Great job, you
Excellent.
guys.
Thank you.
How was the experience for you?
Yeah, it was really fun. I'd done webinars before, but not on FME, so it was a great challenge.
Yeah, it was new. It was fun.
We sure appreciate having you guys join us, and got a lot of nice comments coming in, people really appreciating today. So we really appreciate everyone who tuned in today, everyone who asked a question. Mark, for coming on the air, that's always a lot of fun. And Nampreet behind the scenes answered a lot of questions as well. So all in all, a great team effort, and we always have the best users, and we really we love spending morning with you guys. It ends up being just a lot of fun for us.